Welcome back to Sean and Ari Discuss Israel. We're your hosts, me, Sean,
and me, Ari.
Delve into the dynamics and complexities of issues surrounding Israel. We'll discuss culture, debate the latest developments, and we'll speak about the army. In today's episode, we want to look at one of the profound events over the last year, October 7th, and we're going to do this very personally. So, Ari, we're going to ask you a lot of personal and private details about October 7th and afterwards, but first we want to hear about your general philosophy.
My general philosophy on life is I'm a very big believer in luck. Not in the philosophical, spiritual sense that we get lucky, in the sense that luck is a very simple equation. It's preparedness plus opportunity equals luck. The more you prepare yourself for any event, the more you prepare yourself for what you believe the opportunities are going to be. When the opportunities present yourself, you are more capable of taking advantage of them, and then you get lucky. Simple and straightforward.
Okay. Let's start with the very beginning. I think everyone can hear, and those of us who know you have an American accent. You don't sound like the average Israeli paratrooper. Tell us about how you grew up and how you managed to get to Israel.
So, as you know, my accent, I grew up in New York. Grew up in Queens, New York. I was raised in a very, very Zionistic home. It was actually very interesting. I grew up in my mother's side, both my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And my father's side, they're both very much New York Jews. My grandfather served in the Navy on my father's side. My grandmother was the first woman in her family to go to college and ran a business. Very proper, elbows never on the table, the whole bit. And school was the most important thing. You could not miss school. Unless you had an insane fever or you were basically bleeding out, you went to school. Just because you weren't feeling a little well or you were tired, you went to school. But if there was a protest in front of the UN or by the PLO mission or by the Israeli embassy, the consulate in New York, for those things we were allowed to miss school. We were raised in a very, very strong Zionist home and in a very strong, active members of the community. Both my grandparents and my parents taught me that the Jewish community is something of value and to be valued. It was something that the more you give to it, the more you put into it, the more it will be there to take care of you and protect you in the future if you need it. So I was raised with this unbelievable understanding of the duty and responsibility I had to my Jewish community and to the Jewish people as a whole. So growing up under my equation of luck, my opportunity is to serve and protect the Jewish people in every way possible. When I turned 18, that opportunity presented itself as serving in the Israeli army. I only drafted when I was 19 in the end. And no, I was not a paratrooper, so I'm not your stereotypical Israeli paratrooper. I served in what was then the Charuf battalion.
Yeah, I know that. I know Charuf pretty well.
So where you are in the reserves is where I was in my regular army service. At the time, it was not a special forces unit, but it was not a regular infantry unit. It was in this weird gray area in between. Our training was more specialized than a regular infantry brigade. Our missions were more complicated and significant than regular infantry brigade, but we weren't considered a special forces unit. So it was a very interesting place to serve at a time. I served from 2004, from the end of the Second Intifada, through the disengagement or the expulsion from Gaza and northern Samaria, and I served through the end of the Second Lebanon War.
Okay, I just want to stop 1 second. We'll get into Charuf and what you did. Why did you choose Charuf, or was Charuf chosen for you?
Yes. Okay. So as an Oled that knew Hebrew, at the time we were required to do like a basic training preparation course. At the time it was called Plugat Erez in Mechve Alon. It was not an Ulpan. It was only for people who already knew Hebrew. So we weren't learning Hebrew. But in 3 weeks, you do the beginning of basic training, but a little bit slower. So you learned the basics of the first day that you learn in basic training over the course of a week. We did it over 2 days in a very intense classroom setting. But there were more instructors that were able to break the Hebrew down for us because it's medical terminology. And it's terminology that even if you know Hebrew, you're not necessarily going to know. Like, you're not going to know what a chet ayin, a chosem al rakim.
I did a similar course. I think the biggest challenge for me was going to Jewish day school, my Hebrew was pretty good. I'd spent time in yeshiva, but the language spoken in the army is completely different. It's not Hebrew. It's close to it, but the slang, what we call the Roshei Tevot, the abbreviations, it's a whole different language, and you need to understand that before you can get into the army.
Exactly. So not only that, it took many people who had never fired a gun before. Now, again, I'm coming from the United States. I was a Boy Scout. I had fired guns before in my life, but that's not the norm. So also it goes through the basics of how to handle your weapon, how to shoot your weapon, how to aim your weapon, the basics of being an infantry soldier. It goes through them very intense. The discipline was unbelievable. It was the most discipline I've ever had in my entire army service. But at the same time, it breaks down the language and the technical side in a more friendly environment so that you would pick up the basics, that when you went to basic training after that, you would have the foundation from which to build. In my time there, I had a sergeant, the sergeant of my platoon, which in my head, he was like Superman. I was terrified of him. He made me do probably thousands of push-ups in those 3 weeks, but he had served in Haruv, and in my head, I had him up on a pedestal. A couple of the stories that he told us of his time of service in Shechem and what the training was like, I had him, and I had another commander who I also had a tremendous amount of respect for, who was in the tank corps. And at the end, the last few days there, you meet with different officers who help you decide, a Katzin Miyun, a sorting officer, I guess, or they help assign you of where you're going to go. And I was very torn between the two, because these were the two people that in the last 3 weeks I had a tremendous amount of respect for, and both pulled me. In the end, Haruv won out. I asked to go there. I was sent there. I was accepted. And that's where I served from the first 2.5 years of my army service.
So being in Haruv, it's a completely different unit to what we used to hear about in the news. Everyone knows Golani, and obviously everyone thinks Tzanchanim are the most important. People know about Israeli tanks and the Merkava, and also recently, for good and bad, everyone's heard of Givati. But Haruv is different. Until recently, it was neither here nor there. It didn't have the prestige of Tzanchanim. It didn't have the background of Golani. What kind of soldiers did you serve with, and how many Olim were you?
Okay. So Haruv at the time, it was created to specialize in urban warfare. It was based in Shechem. It didn't switch every 4 to 5 months where it served. And it's actually what's funny. I never did open field warfare past the level of a fire squad, so it's 4 guys, until I got to reserve duty. The first time I did my company scale wide field battle, or whatever you want to call it, in the open field, was the first time I did it was in reserve duty, and I was a little bit lost. It's like I can navigate alleyways and clear buildings like the best of them, but this was all new, running up a mountain shooting. It's kind of fun. But at the time when I was there, because it was neither here nor there, there were almost no Olim. I was the only Anglo-Ole at the time. And because I was a sniper, I was with all the Russians. So it was me and a bunch of Russians on a team. Russian Olim were the snipers. I was given honorary Russianness. Давай. But it was very Sephardi, very Israeli. I never spoke English. There was no one to speak English with. And it was all in Hebrew. And it was just, it was a little bit more rougher, I guess, than the polished, you hear of the paratrooper or the Nachal Brigade. And it was more rough and tumble in that sense. But the camaraderie and the friendship, it can't be matched.
So you had an interesting almost 3 years of service where you said you spent the majority of time in Shechem or Nablus. What were some of the things you did then?
The entirety of my time I spent there, except when we were training. We had two missions that complemented each other. One were the regular, constant guard duty around the different yeshuvim in the area, and there was a checkpoint, a machsom, that actually was not open to Jewish travelers, but it was to control the entrance and exit of Shechem in the direction of Israel. So it was only the Arab residents of the area that were allowed through it. We were providing the control. We weren't doing the actual checking. That was the military police, but we had to protect and provide the larger envelope around the checkpoint itself, which meant we had constant riots on our hands. I wouldn't say daily, but about 2-3 times a week, there'd be 10 of us and 1,000 rioters throwing stones and shooting at us. And then on an almost nightly basis, we'd be doing arrests in the different neighborhoods of Shechem itself. So the refugee camps of Ein Betilme and Jabal and Balata, and then in Zaytun neighborhoods, and different, we'd be going in the middle of the night when people are sleeping to arrest either the suicide bomber himself, the person who has the suicide belt, or the person who's going to like lead the way for them to get into Israel. Once we had solid intelligence on one of those three components, we arrested them on the spot. Again, this was a time when the terrorism around Israel was extraordinarily constant and frequent. Buses were blowing up, and the amount of terrorism that we prevented in our actions was mind-boggling. I don't remember the statistics, but I remember looking back a few years afterwards and being like, "Wow, we saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives in Israel."
So you finished your 3 years of service, and you said you were privileged to have prevented hundreds, if not thousands, of attacks in Israel, and then you move on to life integrating into Israel.
Move on to life. I went into work in construction, which I work until this day. I became a plumber. I work with my hands. I'm never very good at sitting down and sitting in school, and that's not my vibe. I built a family. I'm happily married with 4 wonderful children. I live in Jerusalem, and I continue to do reserve duty throughout. I served in a few different places in reserve duty, and I now, for the last significant part, I've been serving in a Special Forces infantry unit, which is actually made up of former paratroopers who served in the paratrooper Special Forces unit. We're 9 chaluvnikim that serve there. So we have our own little group of inside jokes because there used to be a healthy rivalry between the paratroopers and Charuv, because half the city of Shechem was our responsibility and half was usually the paratroopers. And we usually had to cover their half as well.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of interesting, fun rivalries within the army that extends to reserves. Okay. So you have family, you have wonderful children, you're married, and you're doing reserve duty. Now I want to move to the morning of October 7th. Where were you? How did you find out about the beginning of the war?
October 7th was Simchat Torah. For me, that's a very important time of the year. Like most people in my shul, I blow the shofar in my shul on Rosh Hashanah now for 10 years. And my son, my oldest son, who's 13, his bar mitzvah was Shabbat Shuvah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we had my wife's extended family from abroad was with us. And they all went home on Chol HaMoed. So Simchat Torah was the first Chag of the Chagim, where I don't have some tremendous responsibility on my shoulders as, the guy that blows the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Kippur, or my wife's family from abroad is with me. I finally have the first Chag of the year that's going to be just me and my family. And Simchat Torah, with all the noise and the dancing, it's not usually a holiday I feel super connected to. But in shul that night, there was something opened up, and I didn't leave early. I stayed till the end. I came home ecstatic and happy and exhausted. And I went to sleep saying, there is no way I am waking up in time for shul in the morning. We start davening at 8:30 in our shul. And I said, there's just no way. Doesn't matter what happens. I'm not going to wake up in the morning. And I accepted that I'm probably just going to be really late for davening. And that's fine.
Now, 8:15, we both live in Jerusalem. 8:15, almost exactly, the first siren goes off in Jerusalem.
And I jump out of bed. That siren, it hits like a nerve. There's something like, an automatic response. I jump out of bed. It takes me a quarter of a second to realize it was a siren. And I'm like, wow, God loves me. There's a malfunction in the system. There's a siren going off for no reason, randomly. 15 minutes before I need to go to shul, enough time to get dressed, have a cup of coffee, wake my kids up and go. I was like, this is great. And then the second siren went off 5 minutes later. And I'm like, that's not a malfunction. God does love me, but not for the reasons I thought. And I said, you know what? I better take my phone with me to shul, because if there's 2 sirens in Jerusalem, something's going on. God forbid something really is happening and I get called for reserve duty. I don't want to be that guy that shows up at the very end because he didn't take his phone with him. So I took my phone with me. I put it on vibrate, put it in my pocket, and didn't think about it too much. By the time I got to shul at 9 o'clock with my kids, there'd already been a few other sirens. And when I got to shul, of course, along the way, my non-religious neighbors say, all right, you see what's going on? Everyone has their doors open already. Their windows are open. You hear the news filtering off radios and televisions, and you understand there's something going on down south. I was still under the impression that it's probably no big deal. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to check the news. I'm going to go and daven. It was when we moved the hakafot from our shul into the bomb shelter of our shul, which we're not like an overly cautious community. When we did that, I'm like, okay, there's something going on. I went to the bathroom and I checked the news. And I took my phone out where no one can see, just to be a little bit more respectful. I started looking through the news that there's something going on down south. In the meantime, I put out a message in my WhatsApp group for my reserve duty, like, what's going on? Are we being called up? And our command was like, listen, we're not being called up yet, but we probably will be at some point during the day. Maybe eat lunch quickly and start heading south to where our call-up depot is, which is near Rehovot. 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'm still like, I haven't recognized to what extent everything has gone down south. I'm still thinking, because I'm not really checking the news. I'm kind of just trying to enjoy the Chag. It's not really going on by us. I thought it's going to be like another one of these, they shoot a few rockets. Maybe they tried something. The news is still very unclear also. Like, there weren't any real news reports at that point. It was very like the fog of war, where there was no clear information even. It was hard to remember it. It was only later in the day we were eating lunch by friends of ours who, he serves in the same brigade as I do, in a different battalion, but the same brigade. We're eating at his house, which was next to shul anyways. And it was only sort of towards around 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon where I was like checking my phone every 15, 20 minutes. A bunch of the other guys were like, listen, we're already heading out to the emergency call-up depot. We're not called up yet, but we're going already. We're going to get the Jeeps out. We'll get the radio set up because we're going to be called up. The news is getting clearer, and at that point, I couldn't stay at home anymore. Like, I was too antsy, and my theory is that with all this going on, if we're going to get called up, we're going to be going into immediate action tonight. And I'd rather get a head start on preparing my equipment and my radios and understanding our mission, and maybe even get a little bit of time for a nap in before I head out, because I'm probably going to be up all night tonight doing what I do as a soldier. I headed out around 12, 1 o'clock, I want to say, maybe a little earlier. It's very hazy in my mind.
You said you're headed out. What did you pack at home? How do you get yourself, before mentally ready, physically? What do you take with you from home?
So at home, I have my reserve duty bag is always packed and ready to go. I know I have a list of a few things I have to add to it: my toothbrush, some clean underwear, and some clean socks. I know that I have to add those 3 items to the bag. And other than that, my bag is ready to go. My bag has in it my changes of uniform. It has, my boots are in there. Like, I know I take my bag out off the shelf. I open it up. I put on my first uniform, put my boots on. I put in some clean underwear, socks, and my toothbrush. Zipper it back up. It's ready to go. I have inside my personal equipment that I prefer to use than what I get from the Army. So I have now a better one, but I had my own helmet that I've, over the years, again, I'm 40. I've been doing reserve duty now for over 20 years. So over the years, you collect the little bits and pieces of equipment that just make your life a little bit more comfortable. I have my own personal headset that I use to connect to the radio that is a slightly better quality than what the Army gives me, but it's mine. I have it. I know how to connect it. I have my own vest, my own combat vest. I have, instead of having to reload and unload magazines all the time, I keep my own magazines that are loaded. I keep them at home. Shh, don't tell the authorities. You're not supposed to do that. But it saves me having to reload 8 magazines when I get there. I use them. So I have my basic equipment with me. And then I know that anyways, in my emergency call-up depot, again, I serve in a special forces unit. We had all the equipment we needed. We've always had it. I have my own personal equipment when I get there. So it's not that someone else has been using it this entire time. It's sitting on the shelf waiting for me. I have their protective ballistic glasses that I wear both, for sun and for night. I have there, for my rifle itself, I have a decent scope. I have a handle. I have like the different things I need sitting there waiting for me. And there's a process. Every time I pull that bag off the shelf, it's like riding a bicycle. There's an automatic response that you feel in my own body itself. My heart rate doesn't go. My heart rate actually comes down a little bit. A sense of calm comes over me that, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know what my job is. I just have to go A, B, C. There's a sadab, sedri pula. Like in the army, you regiment everything. Like there's an exact way you take your gun apart to clean it every time. And there's an exact way you put it back together. So you could do it blindfolded. You could do it when you're tired. There's an exact way you're supposed to talk when you talk on the radio to give information over, which is concise and short. But there's an exact process. This is more the way you tie your shoes in the army. There's a very specific way you tie your shoes. So if a medic ever has to cut them off, you can cut them off very easily. But not only that, it's so you can do it without thinking about it. It's very regimented. So the second I put the uniform on, my whole body gets this like, it knows what it's doing. It's going through the motions physically so that I can think about other things that are more complicated that I have to download to my head. I also recognized right away that this call up wasn't going to be short. This wasn't going to be we're going for a day or two. I knew when I left the house, I was leaving for 3-4 weeks. I knew already it was going to be a long time before I came back home. It was actually all of Sefer Bereshit. Like it was the entirety of the book of Genesis that I was not home. From Simchat Torah, the first time I was home for Shabbat was the Parsha of Shmot, was the beginning of Exodus.
I have to ask one very personal question. You put on your uniform, you're heading down to your call-up depot. What do you tell your wife? What do you tell your kids?
So I don't actually remember. Because at that point, first of all, I left my kid, like, when I left my friend's house, I knew I was going home, changing, and leaving. My friends, my children are friends with their friends. They're all playing nicely. I gave each one of them a hug and a kiss, told them I love them. I said goodbye. I said, I'll be home soon, don't worry. I kind of I played down what I knew in my head. I was not going to be home soon. I know this was going to be no big deal. I played that down, and then my wife walked home with me. When I changed and got ready, I helped her just clean up a little bit so the house was in order before I left. And I don't really remember what I told her. I know I told her that everything was going to be okay, that she can rely on the community we live in to take care of her. I reminded her of my neighbors that are now, they're in their 60s, but they're still, they're significant members of the volunteer police force in our neighborhood, that there are people that will be able to take care of her and protect her in my absence. And that she doesn't have to worry about me because I'm not the guy kicking the doors down anymore. I'm not the frontline soldier. I'm about 40, 50 people behind him. And that I'm not I'm not in the thick of it. I'm ever so slightly behind it. So she doesn't really have to worry about me. I'm not really in danger. I was, but, and then I left. I think I just, at that point, I said goodbye. I put my bag in the car and I just started driving. The automatic response in my body took over. I had the presence of mind to actually call the person I work for, who lives in Modi'in. I called him and told him I'm picking him up on the way so that he can take the car because my car is a work car. And I didn't want to have to park it in a parking lot outside Rehovot or on the highway. He should at least have the car to work in the morning because I knew I was going to be gone for a while. My car is very useful for him to work. I didn't want to have to come and get it. And it was still Chag, but I had the presence of mind on the half an hour drive from his house down to my emergency call-up depot to quickly just tell him everything that I was working on, where things stand, and give him any pertinent information that I had that I don't think he had on his own, just so that at least on a business side, while it'd be difficult that I was going to be away, I also recognized that most of the other managers I had working for me were also probably going to be called up at that point, that at least all the projects that I had on my plate, I was able to hand over to him, even though it was Chag, recognizing I'm not going to be home for a long time.
Okay. So you leave house, you speak to your boss, and you get to your emergency call-up center. Every unit, brigade, division all have their own call-up centers, and you explained very well that you've got your own bag on a shelf. And now what? You arrive at the call-up center. What's going on? What's the general feeling? And what are you doing now?
So it's a highly organized orchestra of insanity. our battalion is in a regular time is approximately 350 combat soldiers. This time around, we were about 500 because people who hadn't served for a while, or anyone and everyone that was connected to us, showed up. We ran out of guns at one point, not because there weren't enough, but because we had 150% of our manpower show up. And because I serve on the battalion commander's team, the team that controls the whole battalion, so I don't actually have an official role. My role is me and the other soldiers with me that we have to get our equipment ready to go. And once we're done with our own personal equipment, we have to help fill in the gaps. We have to find where they need the most help and go help out there. So I was helping out with the radio equipment. While we each have our own radios, because radios need to be stored and taken care of better and need to be tested more frequently, the radios for the whole battalion get stored separately. So we have to go get them all out, put in all the right, every time our radio frequencies we use change, make sure all the equipment, even though the equipment was actually checked by us, I think about a month before the war, it had undergone a check. We check it all again to make sure it's all working. And our mission changed, I think, in the first few hours about 1,000 different times. So at first we were going on our jeeps. We have a number of jeeps of our own. Every jeep carries 10 men. We were going to be going on a convoy of enormous amount of jeeps, of about 50 jeeps heading south. Then we were going on helicopters. Then we were going on buses and then walking. Our mission just kept changing again and again and again. So we had to keep shifting our equipment around of what we're carrying, how we're carrying it, the way we're carrying it. And that lasted for about a week and a half while our mission was changing and we were still training. We have to zero our weapons, resetting the radios, resetting the maps we have in our tablets, all just constantly changing for what our mission at hand was going to be. Until about a week and a half, 2 weeks after October 7th, when we went into Gaza for the first time.
Okay. Now we get into you getting into Gaza. When were you told you were going into Gaza? And do you remember that feeling of your unit is now being deployed to Gaza? You're going to be one of the first ground forces deployed. How were you told? How did you feel? Okay.
We were told many, many, many times that we're going. It was almost, okay, we're going tonight. No, we're going tomorrow night. We're going. It was, we were like a spring that was just being constantly pressed more and more and more, and the buildup was unbearable. When we finally went into Gaza, there was such a relief that we're finally going on this mission. We're finally doing what we're trained to do and we've been practicing for nonstop. It was a huge relief to actually go into Gaza. I know it sounds a little bit backwards, but it was mentally more difficult to be in this constant waiting and being held back than to being allowed to go do our job. I don't remember exactly the day or time. I remember the feeling of we got off buses on a kibbutz in northern Gaza that was empty at that point. Around the pool, which was empty, they had this huge lawn that we were spread out on. We were there for about, I think it was about 24 hours before we actually went in. And to go in, there were these ginormous armored trucks that would hold about 60 to 70 of us at a time. They took us in a convoy into Gaza itself, the first couple of kilometers where the tank crews had already opened up, where it's all open fields. They'd already captured. They brought us to the edges of Beit Hanun. And I remember getting into that truck that first night, all my equipment on, sitting down, taking a really deep breath, closing my eyes, and going to sleep. And I don't know if that truck ride was 1 minute long, 30 minutes. I have no idea how long it was. It was the deepest, best sleep I had had since October 7th. Finally, all the pieces had fallen into place. I was as prepared as I possibly could have been for the upcoming battle. I had full confidence in the men around me, in front of me, and behind me, and next to me. I had full confidence in my own commanders that they knew what we were doing. They're good at our jobs, and we're going to do it well. And at that point, there was nothing left for me to think about or do. I could not do anything until I got off that truck whenever it stopped. So there's nothing left to do but sleep, because who knows when I'm going to sleep again. I closed my eyes, I fell very, very deeply asleep. The next time I woke up was the guy next to me jabbing me to wake me up. It's time to get off the truck.
So you get off the truck and you're in the Gaza neighborhood of Bet Hanun. Okay.
Beit Hanun in the northeastern Gaza Strip. And we go down there, and now the Air Force and the artillery and the tank crews have wreaked havoc on the first couple of streets where we enter. And I had this, there was a movie called Apocalypse Now from Vietnam. There's a scene where they walk through a village that's just like buildings are destroyed and things are on fire. It's the middle of the night. I have my night vision on, and there's flames coming out of buildings. Buildings are all collapsed. It was a scene. It was an apocalyptic scene. You look down the street's all ripped up from the tanks that had gone down before us. And we enter the first street where there was the Navy SEALs and so on. The actual special forces were there before us to open it up. And then we spent the first night there. And the next day we calmed down. And then from there we started our battle moving in, expanding the foothold we had, going one street at a time, moving very slowly and carefully forward. We had a constant artillery barrage in front of us. Anything we entered had already been hit by something. We had, artillery shells and missiles and the Air Force working in front of us. And then we would go street by street, slowly moving the front forward, searching not all, but searching most of the houses and buildings that were left, making sure there's no terrorists there along the way. And because I'm with the battalion commander, so I'm not in the foremost line, but there's a full company in front of us usually. There's the first company, us, and then another two companies behind us as we move forward, and then we spread out a little bit. And we would usually take over one house or apartment as our base of operations for the next 48 to 72 hours. We'd have a resupply came in every night to bring us food and ammunition for the next 48 to 72 hours. And then we would slowly move forward. And then every couple of days, we'd move from that building forward another street or two to be closer to the front. We'd set up all the radio equipment, set up our headquarters, and go from there. We did that for about 2 months, I want to say. Time in war is all it's very much a haze. You don't really know what time of day it is. You don't really know what day of the week it was. There was twice the rabbi for our unit is actually with us. He's a combat soldier first, and he's with us on the deputy battalion commander's team. And I remember twice it happened where he walked into the place we were in, and he sees me wearing tefillin. Like I'd put tefillin on. I had 5 minutes of downtime. I put my tefillin on. He's like, "Why are you wearing tefillin?" I'm like, I know it's 3:00 in the afternoon. The sun is still up. I know I missed the times earlier in the day, but he's like, "No, Ari, it's Shabbat." I'm like, "You don't put tefillin on Shabbat." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's Friday." He's like, "No, Ari, it's Shabbat. Look at your watch. It says SA on your watch, not FRI." And I'm like, "Oh, you make a very good point. It is Shabbat. I don't know where Friday went." And that happened twice, actually. And it was funny.
I remember my experience with that was the week had 4 days. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, and Shabbat.
Exactly. Right. And it was, you come down to a very, very minimal existence. I would go about 7-8 days without taking my shoes off. When I would take my shoes off, I would regret it because my feet would be so itchy from the socks. I just want to put them back on and wish I didn't take them off. We changed our undergarments about once every 3 or 4 days if we were lucky. We'd take our shoes off again, but we wouldn't really change our socks because there's a limit to how much you carry with you. Everything with you is on your back. You're eating, for the most part, combat rations.
Right. What did you eat during that time? The first couple of days, I understand most people are eating whatever is in the base. But the first week you're moving through Gaza, even though you are getting a resupply, what food are you generally eating?
So everything we do is on our back. We to get from one place to another, everything's on our back. My pack on my back weighed about 50 kilo. I started the war weighing 90 kilo. So my pack weighed slightly over half my own body weight. We would carry that in, leave it, make sure the building we're going into would clear it, do the battle side of things, go back, get our bags, bring them in, set up shop for 2 or 3 days. then once we'd go to the next place, it was schlepping, for lack of it. We'd schlep our gear to the next place. We'd had all our food with us for the first couple of days. The first 3 or 4 days, you don't get a resupply. So you have all your food, all your water, batteries, and ammunition for 3 or 4 days of battle with you, which is an extraordinarily large amount of weight. It's canned tuna fish, dried meat like beef jerky, cans of corn, which doesn't really provide any nutritional value, but actually at least tastes good. Energy bars, things like that. That is what we ate for the first couple of days. And then as the supply lines were stabilized, we have what's called a rasap, the quartermaster for our team. And I have to say, they were the awesomest part of this war. They got us, even if it was just sending little packets of spices in to add to the food we had, so we had a little bit of flavor. Or every time someone had a birthday, they'd somehow get a small little like packaged cake in for us. There were a couple of days where they took empty ammunition cans and they filled it with ice and packed it with cans of Coke, and then more ice and sealed them up. And from when they pack it till it gets to us, it could be between 12 and 30 hours. So they packed it with ice and they would send it in with the resupply. So we had cold Coke in the middle of Gaza, which was something I personally enjoyed. An enormous amount of Turkish coffee, constantly drinking coffee. It was just you can't exist without it. And that's what we ate for the first, I'd say, 2.5, 3 months of the war, was eating like that. And we got out, it was approximately every 28 days, we'd get 40 hours out of Gaza. So you'd have 48 hours from when you left to get back to your emergency base, store your sensitive and vital equipment, then go home. And then you still have to get back to your emergency call-up base before you went back to Gaza. So you had about, on a 48-hour leave, you'd have only about 20 to 30 hours actually at your home.
So tell us about the first time you made it home. You've now been in the thick of battle for 2.5 weeks, and now finally you have a limited amount of time to go home.
So the first time I went home was actually, we weren't even going out whole groups at a time. We were going out 2 or 3 soldiers from each team at a time over the course of about 3 weeks. So you'd go out for 2 days, 2 guys, they'd come back in, 2 different guys would go out. And in the middle, I kept saying, I don't need it, send someone else. Like there were other people that, they had children who were sick, or they had babies at home, or they had just been married. Like I had pushed off me going out more and more and more because I felt like there were other people that needed it more than me. And then they said, okay, all right, it's your turn to go. There's no arguing. You're going home. And I'm like, okay, but how do you get from the front lines in Beit Hanun out to somewhere else where you can then get further out home? So that process was actually quite interesting. There was we had our battalion commander's friend from his days in where they served previously. He's a retired Aluf Mishneh, a lieutenant colonel. He's 47, and he didn't really have a job at that time in the reserves. He was in between positions, and he decided, okay, so I'm going to come with my buddy, who's this battalion commander, as an advisor. And him and I went out as a pair that time, and we walked the first 9.5 kilometers in between the different units. I'm on the radio telling them, listen, don't shoot us. It's the 2 of us walking. And we walked all the way back to the entrance of Beit Hanun. And from there, we caught a ride with a convoy from a different unit out to the kibbutz where he had his car. So we get out to his car. It's around midnight already. And I'm half asleep, exhausted. We take all of our equipment, we dump it in the trunk of his car. He's going home to the Shomron, to Samaria. He's like, I'll drop you off on the way. I'm like, I have grenades, I have a radio. He's like, you have a safe at home for your gun, don't you? I'm like, yeah. He's like, just leave your grenades in the safe. Leave your radio locked up. And just don't get robbed over Shabbat. I'll pick you back up Saturday night on the way back. This is very late Thursday night. It's the middle of Thursday night, Friday morning. And I got home at 3 a.m. on Friday. Now, when I'm not home, we have like a gate outside our front door that my wife locks to feel safe. I don't keep a key to that gate on me. So I get home. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I have all of my equipment straight from Gaza. I have all the dust from head to toe. I have not showered in weeks. I took my shoes off probably twice in that time. I'm outside my front door, and I have a dilemma. Do I rip the screen on the gate to ring the bell to wake up my wife? Because I'm calling her, and she turns her phone on total silence that night. I called my 13-year-old son to wake him up, but he was sleeping by a friend's house, so he couldn't open the door for me. Or do I just lay down on the floor outside, and my wife will wake up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. She'll see my messages, and she'll come open the door. And I sat there, and turning on my phone for the first time in 4 weeks, I had close to 4,000 WhatsApp messages. So I figured, all right, I'll start going through messages. I saw a friend from LA I hadn't spoken to in a while had messaged me. So I called my friend in Los Angeles, who was, wasn't through gone. We talked for a while. And my wife woke up and she let me in. I put my grenades in my safe, took a shower, a very, very long, hot shower, laid down and went to sleep. And had a very nice 48 hours at home. And then Saturday night, I went back. It was very strange being home. It was very, very strange. I listened to the news for about a minute before I turned it off. I went back to being in my bliss of being disconnected from the world. Because when you're in Gaza, there's no news. You have no cell phones with you. There's no internet. You're disconnected from the outside world. So any arguments or what's going on in the international community, we had no connection to. We had no idea what was going on outside of our battalion, the brigade we were in, maybe every little bit when we'd hear what's going on the division level. But our existence was very, 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 very mitzumtzam. It was very, very concentrated just to what we're doing, and that was it. And it was actually really nice. For the first time in years, I was disconnected from the world.
Right. I want to bring that up. When you left on October 7th, or even a little bit before, the state of Israel on October 6th was not very good. There was fighting and screaming with regards to the Netanyahu government and the judicial reform and people threatening not to serve in the army. And then came October 7th, and you served in a unit with people from across the political divide, across the different cultures of Israel. And now you're all serving in Gaza together. What was that like?
So, yeah, it was actually one of the things that stuck with me most. The battles, they kind of fade away. The extreme adrenaline feeling, I can remember it, but it becomes insignificant. I think that from this entire war, the thing that stuck with me most was the achdut, was the brotherly love that we all had for each other. Now, we had reserve duty at the peak of the judicial reform. We had a huge exercise in the Negev that was 5 days long, at the peak, when there was right-wing protests and left-wing protests and Kaplan and the Knesset, and the team I serve on covers left-right divide, religious-secular divide. We have a guy that serves with us who's not Jewish, halachically, who raises his family here. We covered the spectrum of Israeli Jewish existence, and we all get along really, really well. We disagree to an extreme on things, but we know how to put that all beside us and be friends with each other and help each other and work together. There was one day in Beit Hanun, I remember we were outside of a school. It was a UN compound that had a school and a hospital all together, that there was a significant Hamas force inside, and we had surrounded it from multiple different sides. And it wasn't just let's run in there and kill everybody. It was let's take this slowly, let's do it. And there was one night where we, if you're not attacking, you're still in a building, you still have to do guard duty to make sure you don't get surprised. And you do it in pairs. So me, the Orthodox, fairly right-wing American immigrant, is doing guard duty at night with a Sabra, secular Israeli from the Negev, who is socialist by nature. I'm a capitalist. He's secular. I'm religious. He is very much anti-Netanyahu. I wouldn't say I'm pro-Netanyahu, but I'm very much on the right of the pro-judicial reform. He's anti-judicial reform. And we had a 1 hour guard duty shift. We did not wake up the guys that were supposed to come after us for about 3 or 4 hours, because it was one of the most enlightening discussions I've ever had. We were debating from a place of love and respect, everything from the education system to the judicial system to the relationship between the army and politics. We went into like all of the issues that are pain points that cause disagreement and fighting. We discussed back and forth, and he challenged my ideas to the point where I had to back them up, and I challenged his understandings of the world. And to say that we convinced one another, I don't think so. But I definitely gained an enormous amount of respect for him as a person, and some of the positions that he had that in my head they made no sense. But now that I had the opportunity to listen to someone who truly believes it, I could understand where they came from. And it was, forget all the battles, forget all the explosions and all the really cool stuff we did, that's really cool and exciting. That guard duty, to me, was the most important part of this war. And when I talk to friends of mine, that happened thousands and thousands of times over between anyone and everyone who served. I don't know any combat soldiers that went into this war and came out the same way they went in. They came out with a greater respect and love for the other side. Now, we didn't convince or change anyone's opinions, but we were able to bring the animosity down to the point where we can actually talk to each other again. So I want to thank Hamas for that. I want to thank Hamas for bringing unity back to the Jewish people. It sucks that had to be that way, but that's definitely one of the great things that they accomplished.
So you actually did 3 separate tours in Gaza. So let's speak about your second tour now.
So the first tour was the most intense. From a battle and warrior perspective, was conquering Beit Hanun and the entire northeastern Gaza Strip, was the most intense as a soldier of anything I've ever experienced. I did not keep a journal at that point, and my recollection, my memory of it is actually very limited. Like, I can remember the intensity, but I can't remember the details. The second tour was probably the calmest. We started off on a very secondary mission, protecting the supply lines along the coast. We built a highway going straight south from Zikim, from the border of Gaza and in the north. There's an army base called Zikim. There's a highway the army built that starts there, that goes in a straight line parallel to the beach, straight south. It's literally a highway. It's a paved road that we built as a main supply artery, and we were guarding a section of it. So it was mainly not a built-up area. It was mainly fields on one side and beach and the ocean on the other. And we had guard posts along the way. We had small bases on a company level, and we really didn't have much to do. And it was also when there was the ceasefire. So there was a period where we really had nothing to do, where we weren't allowed to do anything at all. That was, I found an enormous level of boredom. But at the same time, I was very productive. So there was one point where the army was bringing us pizzas in. By the time they got to us, they were cold. So I dug out a hole in the ground and I built a pizza oven out of rocks and a piece of metal that we found. And we'd burn the random garbage that we found to make a fire and heat the pizzas up in the pizza oven. Or we had this one little guard tower. It was also raining out. It was the January time. It was raining and it was windy, and we'd have to guard, and we had the D9s built a sand dune for us to use as a guard post that Army bulldozers built a bunch of sand dunes, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. It rains, the sand goes everywhere, it gets muddy, it doesn't protect us from the wind. So I got them to supply us with 100 sandbags, and the engineer and the construction worker and me, I had a bunch of guys together in the middle of the day. It was sunny out. We took our equipment off, got a little bit of a tan. We filled up about 300 sandbags, and I built a Vietnam style that I can remember from pictures, guard tower, that was then used by almost everyone that replaced us afterwards, which was nice because you could sit inside. I put a chair in. I used some plastic we found to make a windbreak, so when it was windy and rainy out, you had a little bit of protection from the elements. But that was the second round. It was frustrating because we were there. We weren't really doing anything because you're on defense. And you're on defense after being on intense offense. We know it's important intellectually, but it doesn't feel important. But at the same time, we were going back, and all the areas the army skipped over that were in our sector we were searching every structure. So we found, one of our teams found a huge storage room full of guns and grenades and other Hamas army equipment. At that time, we found some of their communications equipment. We found a couple of tunnel openings. Like, we did find stuff and we did do stuff, but it was like it was the calm period, I'd call it. And then on the third time, we were then now under serving. Our battalion was broken off of our brigade and our division, and we were fighting with a non-reserve brigade. So we were fighting under the officer school. The officers academy is its own brigade. So we were fighting under one of the top regular army brigades, and we were their special forces. So we were going ahead of the regular army in that point as reservists. So we went back into intense battle in the northeastern and eastern neighborhoods of Gaza City, where we were there. There were days where it was extremely intense, so then there were a couple of days of calm, and then extremely intense, and there was more searching every single structure in our sector, clearing it out, finding endless amounts of weaponry. If you searched an apartment and you didn't find anything, that means you forgot to search under the kid's bed, because that was where they stored their guns and grenades. It was always under the kid's bed. Can't explain it. That's where it was. And we would search buildings, destroy them. Search buildings, destroy them. That was the process. And we'd move the line forward slowly but surely, closing the circles around Gaza City from every direction. It was after that then we came out of that was for about a month, where again we would do 2 weeks there, 2 or 3 days at home, 2 weeks there, 2 or 3 days at home, 2 weeks there, and then we came out. When we came out, it was a very bittersweet feeling. It was sweet in the sense that we were all burnt out. We had enough. It was 100+ days of constant battle, missing our families, missing our jobs, missing just the simple comforts of life, of having a shower every day, having a hot meal more than once every 3 or 4 days, knowing when you're going to wake up and go to sleep. There's being able to take your shoes off without thinking about it, without planning in advance who's going to take their shoes off when. Being able to actually let your guard down and go to sleep completely and not have one eye or one ear open all the time. But it was bitter in the sense that we understood that the war was continuing, but without us. There were soldiers in battle and we weren't there, which is a very hard feeling as a combat soldier, to know that there's someone else fighting and it's not you. And then we went home, and then we were home for about 2 months. And then when we returned to now our first round up north over the Passover holiday, where we served in Metula fighting a defensive war. So in our time in Gaza, we had a couple of soldiers that were injured from our team. But we had one who was killed, Ben Arush, within our battalion, we have the motorized logistical support, heavy weapons. They carry machine guns, but it's also their medical evacuation. So no matter where we are, our jeeps are never more than a minute away. They're pretty freaking awesome. They're the guys that when the shit hits the fan and you need help, they're racing in under fire in their open jeeps. Like, they're sitting there on the top with a machine gun out. The only thing they have protecting them is a bulletproof, ceramic vest. They're racing in, providing heavy weapons, cover fire support, extracting wounded soldiers. So there was an incident where they came to, they were bringing a resupply in the middle of the day, which was not normal, which was not something we did frequently because of this. And at night when they drive, they're in pitch black. They're all driving with night vision, which, if you've tried it, is not so easy. It takes a lot of practice to get good at it because your depth perception is very off. But this time they came in during the day and they were ambushed. And there was one guy who's, God always takes the good ones. He always had a smile on his face. He was always happy. It was Ben Arush was killed, and it was a stab in the heart for our entire battalion, because he was a guy. He was a guy. He was one of those characters that everybody knew. every time the Jeep would show up, he'd jump off the top, give everyone a big hug with his big smile and laugh around like, oh, you guys wanted some food, I hear, you're hungry. And like say in this joking, teasing kind of way, like they have the light, like we're just whining and complaining when really we're just eating tuna fish out of a can for 3 weeks. So when we left, it was a little bit sad that we still left. I mean, again, he was buried properly in Israel. Like we didn't leave him behind, but we never got the feeling that we really got to revenge his death at that point. And then when we went up north, we were fighting a defensive war out of Metula for about a month around the Passover holiday. And our mortar team, which was stationed in the rear in a very deep valley, Hezbollah managed to get a drone to strike our mortar team, killing 2 of our soldiers at that point, which was also like it was one of those. It was a very bad day for us that day, and even there, we couldn't respond. It wasn't us; it was the Air Force responding to us. But we were never able to go and avenge their deaths on a personal level, and we're looking forward to that opportunity in the coming battles in Lebanon.
All right. I want to speak about, after all this, the stuff you've described is just gut-wrenching. 3 tours in Gaza and then Lebanon, losing friends, but also the feeling of unity, the intenseness, the calm, the boredom, the craziness. Did you feel you needed help emotionally afterwards?
So the army was really good about it. As someone who's been in the Second Lebanon War and other operations since then, and I was able to compare from what the army did in the past to what the army did this time, when we came out of Gaza for our last time, we didn't go straight home. We were kept on base first in our emergency call-up base for 24 hours to put our equipment away, clean our equipment, fix it, and they also had a full day of psychological processing where each team sat down in a room with a facilitator and we talked out. I mean, I sat there quietly. I did not have really anything to share. I'm not a feelings guy. That's not me. But anyone who wanted to share. But it was more they gave us tools for the things to expect, like to recognize that we're probably going to get into a fight with our wife significantly when we're home for the first week. Like that's a relationship that needs to be rebuilt because we've been gone for 3 months. Like we may have been home for like a short period, but we were never significantly part of their lives for the last 3 months. They've learned how to deal with life without us. To recognize that going to the supermarket, people are going to be rude and not nice to you, and you're going to be sitting in the supermarket and you're just going to be like, there's a war going on and I'm buying cornflakes. What is going on here? Like, this is just not okay. Or like, you're going to go back to your job and the things that were really meaningful and important to you, you're also going to have a different perspective on. So they told us what to look out for and how to recognize when it's normal and fine and when it's crossed the line and it's not normal and you should seek help, and how to look out for each other. So that was really important in the first 24 hours that we had that, made aware of it. It was funny because at first you go home every night and then you came back to base for 3-4 days at first. Like you didn't just go straight home. It was like you transitioned, and everybody came back after that first night at home. Everyone was in a bad mood. I'm like, oh, did you fight with your wife? Yeah, did you fight with your wife? Of course. We all fought with our wives. We all fought with our girlfriends. Some of us slept in their cars. One of us slept by a friend's house who's single. Like, it was a mess. But we understood that we kind of expected it, and we knew to help each other out with it. And then the army was about, I think it was 2 months later. It was right before we went to our next round up north. The army took us on a 3-day retreat, we'll call it, for lack of a better word, where it was just us. It was outside of the army framework. It was actually in the Golan before the Golan had rockets being shot at it the whole time. We stayed in a guest house on a kibbutz in normal beds with a decent breakfast. And then we spent the rest of the day around a bonfire in a field, talking and processing and talking about our time in Gaza. And that's where I realized that I don't remember 98% of the things that happened, especially during that first month. Everyone remembers one little piece, and we're talking about it. I'm like, that really happened? wait, a missile hit the room next to where we were sleeping? I was like, Ari, you don't remember that? A wall fell on you and you were screaming to take the pillow off your head, but it was a giant chunk of cement. I'm like, I don't remember this at all. They're like, wow, that's crazy. And then I would talk about a different event where a tank almost ran us over. And I was like, I don't remember that. No one else remembered that. I'm like, yeah, like this tank drove right by us and like he just missed us and we're all fine. But for me, it was like he almost just ran over 4 of my friends and he didn't even realize he's a tank. He can't, that's okay. But, and we were in the wrong. We were not where we were supposed to be. He was totally fine. He was doing his job correctly. But it was like no one else remembered that. And I was like, holy crap, I almost lost 4 of my friends in front of my eyes and they don't even recognize that it happened. So we spent 3 days processing and going through it and talking about it and also learning from each other, like what I did to rebuild a relationship with my wife. Like I shared with everyone that what I realized was that I didn't do it like consciously. I didn't realize I was doing it. I was dating my wife. We left our 13-year-old son at home with our kids and we would go on a walk at night for half an hour, just around the block, turn like without our phones, just to walk outside out of our own home, just the 2 of us. And yeah, there were some nights we would talk nicely, some nights we'd argue, but we were dating again. We were rebuilding that relationship. I didn't even realize I was doing it and that's like a real thing that you're supposed to do. But I was able to share my experience that I was doing with other guys that were still having trouble with that. And other guys were able to share how they got back into the mode of their jobs and getting back into that grind and it not feeling insignificant. So we were able to help each other out. And I think that over time that definitely gave me at least the tools to really deal with life again.
Okay. So now we are nearly 10 months after the war and we're thinking about what's next. What's next for you?
That's a really good question.
So I'm asking it.
So I don't think there is what's next for me just yet, because no matter how much I reapply myself and put myself back in my life, at any moment my phone can ring and I'm going off to Lebanon. Like we're on call up. We know that when things happen in Lebanon, we're the first guys there. We're the ones doing it. So at any moment, any phone call I get could be, all right, that's it. Your whole life is going back on hold and you're going to Lebanon. So there's really I'm not really after it just yet. And I don't think I'll be after it just yet for at least 2 or 3 years. Because even after this is officially over, I'm still going to be doing 40, 50 days of reserve duty, to maintain the situation. And I'm proud of that. I'm happy to do that. It's important. I wouldn't have it any other way. I couldn't live with myself if someone else was doing it instead of me. But I'm not really going to move past it. I think that this podcast is definitely being able to share and discuss and to unpack all the different things that are going on is helpful. It's part of the process of not only moving past, but building something positive out of this war. Every crisis is an opportunity in disguise. From this crisis, first of all, I've gained a whole new, deeper understanding of what the word achdut means, of what unity really means. The outpouring of unity from the global Jewish world to us here in Israel and within Israel from different communities has been extraordinary in every way, in every possible concept. To have lived through that, there's no way to really explain it until you've lived through it. And that makes me really positive moving forward that Am Yisrael can survive anything. It'll be hard, it'll be tough, but we can survive anything, especially if we're united and together. Moving forward, we'll see what happens. I look forward to continuing to build Israel, making it a more beautiful and more enjoyable place, and to help build more homes for new Olim and welcome more Jews home to Israel, and be able to make put Miluim reserve duty as a thing in the back of my head that happens once a year for a little bit planned in advance, and focus on building beautiful homes for new immigrants in Israel. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Great way to end it. Thank you very much, Ari. That was a bit of a break from our regular discussing current events, but it was a very important discussion to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.
In current events, but it was a very important discussion to have. Thank you very much. We'll be back with more of the Sean and Ari Discuss Israel If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share. We hope to be back next week with another episode.